Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to gather today to consider the powerful benefits of collaborative art and the superpowers that are. There are many artists in the room today who have superpowers to engage and build community and to tell richly textured stories that can deepen our understanding of culture, history, society, and more. And this is true of many different art forms, as we know, including poetry, literature, and music. And tonight we'll be focusing especially on printmaking and artworks in and on paper. Each of our guest speakers has made significant, deep contributions in the realms of collaborative art making and art sharing. So we're going to begin with our artist per Juanita's request. Helen Frederick is a curator, educator, coordinator of international projects, and the founder of Pyramid Atlantic Art Center. She is a professor emeritus in the School of Art at George Mason University and directs Reading Road Studio, a collaborative atelier for works in and on paper. She has received the Southern Graphics Council International Printmaker Emeritus Award and the College Art Association Distinguished Teachers Award, and is featured in the Brooklyn Museum. This is very cool. Brooklyn Museum Feminist Art Base. Clap to that. Now, Phil Sanders is a collaborative master printer, author, educator, and artist. He founded and directs P.S. Marlowe Fine Art Publishing in Asheville, North Carolina, and recently authored the wonderful book, which I have at my desk at all times, Prints and Their Makers. Sanders served as COO of the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts and as director, master printer of the Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop in New York City. He also worked as a master printer and studio director of Universal Limited Art Editions. Juanita and Mel Hardy are the yes, thank you. Absolutely, yes. Juanita and Mel Hardy are co-founders of Millennium Art Salon, and together they are also avid and deeply knowledgeable art collectors. Juanita Hardy has a passion for fostering healthy, thriving, and equitable places to live, work, learn, and play. She has over 45 years of business experience, including 31 years working with IBM and over a decade in the real estate industry. She founded Tiger Management Consulting Group and has been associated with Urban Land Institute, a global nonprofit committed to responsible land use. For arts and business contributions, Hardy was named a 2022 honoree by the Phillips Collection and a 2010 Minority Business Leader by the Washington Business Journal. Melvin Hardy is a self-described creative class theoretician, lifting the power and prowess of creatives as solution providers and problem solvers. At the Carter School for Peace at George Mason University, he collaborates with colleagues in museums, libraries, and art spaces to imbue his students with tools for understanding their personal agency and creative activism. He engages his practice in nuclear weapons abolition at the United Nations, social justice activism through religious institutions, and protections with civil society organizations, and housing activism through professional organizations. My name is Catherine Blood, and oh, please, yes, please. I am the extremely eager and excited and delighted and honored Catherine Blood, and I am the library's curator for its collections of artist fine prints. The Library of Congress has about 60,000 artist fine prints from the 15th century to the current day, and we're going to be seeing some really beautiful and meaningful examples during our conversation tonight, beginning with... beginning with this very important and meaningful example by Helen Frederick, which is a real storytelling kind of image, Juanita. And my eye, of course, there's so much depth and so many textures and layers in this. My eye goes straight to Camille Phillips. Will you please tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, thank you, Catherine. First of all, I just want to express, I think, from Mel and me and Millennium Art Salon, our huge appreciation to you and to the Library of Congress for hosting us here in this salon and in this beautiful space. Isn't this phenomenal? I mean, so we thank you and we appreciate you on so many levels.
It's an honor.
And so, secondly, I want to answer your question about this print, but I think I need to provide a little context before I do that.
Please.
Just a little bit about Millennium Art Salon for those of you in the room that don't know Millennium Art Salon or are just being introduced to it. As this shows, we're about to celebrate our 25th anniversary. In October 2000, we will have been doing what we do for 25 years. And some of you may ask, well, what is it that you do? And what it is that we do is about education, about raising the consciousness and raising awareness around topics of art and culture. And we do that principally through salon talks. And we also do international tours. We collaborate with different organizations like the Library of Congress and others to host events. And central to a lot of our work, we recognize, after just looking over the span of 25 years, is a lot of what we have done has been in the area of prints and works on paper. And this image that you see is the first of, the third print in a series of prints that we have done over the course of our 25 years. It's the fourth print, because I'll tell you about the third one. The third one you'll hear more about is called In Unison, 20 Washington, D.C. artists, and we'll talk more about that. We're appreciating that some of the folks in this room are actually artists that participated in that project, but we'll say more. This represents the imagery of all of it sort of is a way of summarizing our 25 years. I think brilliantly done by Helen. And Helen, I hope that you'll say more about how you produced this and what went into the makings of this. But there's so much imagery here. I think maybe I want to turn to Mel to sort of share in your thinking about this print and some of the imagery that it represents in an attempt to answer Catherine's question.
Right. It's probably better for Helen to talk about the vocabulary that you might see expressed here. I can just give you my impressions.
But what I was getting at, sweetheart, is the imagery, like the image of Camille Phillips and James Hatch at the bottom of the image. Okay. They were the inspiration around the creation of Millennium Art Salon. And any of you that attended their salons, they weren't called salons, they were called interviews in New York. You know what I'm referring to. They were conversations similar to the conversations that we have had over many years here in DC. So that, and maybe the story behind how Millennium really came to be from those two individuals.
Right. So James Hatch and Camille Phillips formed something called the Hatch Phillips Archives in 1974. 1974 is a very important year in New York. Most recently, there was the Just Above Midtown New York show with Linda, well, now I forget her last name. Brenda. Um,
I'm
I
sorry.
forget.
Can't help.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, just above Midtown, New York. Also, 1974 was the formation of the Corinne Jennings and Kinkelaba House. 1974 was also the year, they said 1972, 1974 was the Brandywine Workshop in Philadelphia. There are many of these groups that kind of aggregate how we think about the response to America's sensibility about itself, with the primacy of certain creative groups who contribute to the identity of America through those groups. Hatch Phillips Archives and its Artists and Influence Conversations were amongst the most important aggregators of the primacy of pluralism in thinking about American culture and its advance in a period post-civil rights that we can have through the arts, culture, and humanities. So what Millennium Art Salon was actually inspired by, the Hatch Phillips. Juanita, when she was detailed from Washington, D.C. to New York City, learned of this grouping, these interviews, these conversations that were, these interviews were videotaped, they were transcribed, and each year they were published in an annual journal. And so we are the descendants of Hatch Phillips in Millennium Art Salon, and so this print, and I will leave it to you to talk about the vocabulary on the prints, the iconography of this print, Helen, because you're its
Yeah,
maker.
but just to finish the story, we wanted to do Artists and Influence South in DC, and Camille and Jim said no. We do what we do. This is a quote. You do what you do, and we'll help you. And that's how we started and became Millennium Art Salon. So the model for what we created really came from these two individuals. And the North Star, if you see it right at the very top, sort of to the left from where I'm viewing, EJ, and then there's like a star right beside it for EJ Montgomery, was the guiding light for the work that we did here in DC. She served on the Artist Advisory Board along with Camille Billups and Jim Hatch, Sam Gilliam, and Alan Edmonds. They formed our Artist Advisory Group.
It's a dream team.
It was
really
a dream team. They were amazing folks, and they really were the start for our work. And then all the other imagery just represent what I said earlier, the tours that we did, international tours, domestic tours. That's the bus that you see there, the bridge to bring people together of different ethnicities, different points of view, because we started out as largely African American focused, but we welcomed other cultures and other to our fold, and we became that over time. We demonstrate that we can all live together and work together and be together and have fun. We did that. And so that's all of that imagery. And so Helen knew our story, and she then brought all these wonderful things together and worked her magic as a printmaker to create this print. That's a long answer to your question.
That's exactly what I was hoping for. Thank you so much. Do you want to talk a little bit about the creation, Helen, too?
So as Mel and Juanita said, they invited me to do a print, and I didn't want to do a Frederick print. I wanted to do a Millennium print. And so looked at the scholarship that James Hatch had written. The bridge, of course, is the connector. the African American mask and the bowls and so forth also refer to collecting. And there was a wonderful mural at the Phillips that was painted by Senegalese artists. So just putting all that vocabulary together was such a joy for me. And it's a two-block relief, 2 linoleum blocks, a blue block and a black block.
Wonderful, such depth and meaning. Every choice is thoughtful. And just I thought it would be valuable to have, this is just a little snippet of your vision statement that talks about your intention and practice in a very clear way. Oh, did I go too, okay. So the first class from Mel's Art and Peace Culture Transformation class at George Mason University was co-taught with you and Helen, and featured the In Unison portfolio that was published by Millennium Art Salon. The Library of Congress was the first public institution to acquire this. And so, please, yes. And please talk a little bit both about the class and start to get into the portfolio. We're going to go a little deeper into that next.
So I have the benefit of being an instructor at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution. And my charge there was at George Mason University. And my charge there was to engage people from postdoctorate participants, doctoral candidates, master's level, college level, and community level people who self-select this class. It's a non-credit certificate of attendance course. And the design of it is to bring students, as described earlier, to what I call honest broker institutions, to surround them in the warm confines of art at the very highest levels, to understand who they might be as creatives, to help imbue them as creative souls, and to move them toward a type of activism, to understand the role of creatives in justice-seeking work across geography, across ethnocultural character, so that we can formulate a new design for, and I'll borrow your language, Catherine, pluralism in America. So that's purpose for me, and I know that everyone on this dais has that as a part of their own predicate in their professional lives. And I think that in the matter of this audience, we engage in that as well. So I'm honored to be associated with that. I'm especially honored to see this image of a community member, Rashid Johnson, during this class that we did here at the Library of Congress, at Catherine's studio, if you will. Well,
everyone is invited to our reading room,
right.
And this is a free, public, open collection, and it belongs to every person in this room.
That's great.
So,
Juanita and I were, had the honor of being in this room as we talked about the In Unison project.
can you talk about the origin story a little bit?
In Unison. So In Unison, it's called In Unison, 20 Washington, D.C. artists. And it is, I mentioned it's the third print project that we've done and the most ambitious. It started with a conversation, a call to our dear artists in our community, Sam Gilliam. And we said, Sam, we would really appreciate your doing a print for Millennium to commemorate Millennium's 10th anniversary. This is 2010. And Sam said, no, I won't do a print from just me. We'll do a print of 5. We'll do 5. And I said, okay, 5 artists. I said, first of all, let me just let you know it's going to take place at George Mason University, and just have to clear it with Helen, because Helen was at GMU at this point. And I called Helen and said, Helen, Sam wants to do 5. She says, okay, we can do 5. And so we off and running. We're going to do this 5 portfolio. And then he started calling. And he kept calling every day, adding another artist. We finally got up to 20. And we said, that's it, Sam, 20 artists. And so that's how this whole project started. So some of the artists in Unison Project are in the room, in this room. We're deeply, deeply appreciative of those artists that participated. And I won't put anybody on the spot, but I feel like, but once you see some of the imagery, you'll get sort of called out. These are some of the images. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, well, let me just mention that why this was such a perfect acquisition for us. So DC artists, one of the ways that we're trying to collect is thinking about covering across the United States. So pluralism, inclusiveness means perspective, it means place, it means technique, it means style, every way that you can possibly kind of slice that idea. So it was wonderful to have this critical mass of Washington, D.C. artists, a collective, collaborative effort. There was a special dimension that there are many, many monotypes. One of the sort of strengths of this portfolio is that it's full of really interesting, unusual, different approaches to the technique of monotype, which maybe you can talk about the artists in the room in a second. So it was perfect. We were just absolutely thrilled. And we've been sharing it ever since. You want to talk about monotype real quick?
Many of these artists had never worked together. They knew about each other, but they'd never been in the same room. They were, many of them, non-printmakers as well. And so we felt the best thing was to give them something large enough, a big plastic plate, that they could play around with as painters. And then we would facilitate the printing through the presses and so forth. So there were a lot of interns and students and professional printmakers that assisted them, so that they felt very fluid in making the work rather than intimidated. And because it was one of a kind, it didn't mean it didn't go through the press a number of times. It became very fulfilling as an artwork.
Let me also just point out one thing. One of the things that I really enjoyed about this is two particular aspects of this. So Sandra Arkin was working in encaustic. How do you print with encaustic? And collectively, under her guidance, collective guidance, her guidance, that was done. Achille Ron Anderson used the scrubbing pads on a mechanical floor polisher to create his image. So, and to think about innovation and to think about what it means to collaborate. This is small d democracy at its best.
So, and we have some images that show working out different kind of solutions and ideas and experimenting.
What's so wonderful about this is the diversity of artists, right? Diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, age, gender. You see here Walter Kravitz on the image on the left with Martha Jackson Jarvis looking at her print, Helen Frederick, who provided guidance to all of the artists. And then you see Aziza, who's in this room, by the way. Aziza over here, Sandra Arkin over to my left, your right, E.J. Montgomery. And in the background, you see Sandra Arkin and Sheila Kreider. These are all artists, multi-generational artists that are all working together in the print studio at George Mason, creating fabulous work. There you see Renee Stout, and you see Achille Ron Anderson. You see Susan Goldman. You see EJ. They're playing in the background while EJ is busy at work working on her print. I mean, it was just a and these images, by the way, John Woo we contracted John Woo to capture the moment, and he took fabulous photographs and created a video. And if anybody's interested in video, just go to Millennium Art Salon website and you can see it. You can see them actually at work.
I think I put it on one of the slides, and just a couple more. Yeah.
Oh, there's Michael.
Yeah.
Michael Platt, and where's
And Carol.
Carol Bean. You see Michael and Carol Bean with Sheila. Then you on Tom Green, who's no longer with us. Michael's no longer with us. These are just it was a very magical moment that we're so grateful that these artists participated and we were able to make this happen, which is why we were committed to placing this placing this portfolio under good care. It was really important that it be honored for what it is, and we would negotiate that. And that's why we kept it for how many years before we finally got
Thank you for entrusting
the
us
right
with
home
it.
for it.
But I mean, printmaking is by its nature a collaborative, community-based kind of proposition. And these photographs are just worth their weight in gold to see this, to see how it was in the studio. I want to mention we saw Susan Goldman in the earlier slide, who made a beautiful new film that's being screened, honoring Michael Platt and his contribution.
That will be screened this Saturday at the Smithsonian Anacostia Museum.
Yeah.
And has some of the video footage from in Unison, so we're
It's
happy
really,
about that.
it's really an incredible contribution. And now we're going to turn to Helen Frederick and just sort of go back to one of your many, many and sundry contributions has been to found Pyramid Atlantic. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But you curated this anniversary show, so maybe we can start there.
Oh, thank you, Catherine, so much. I want to start by saying I believe that works on paper and graphic impressions are enduring and influential. And as Catherine has noted, it's because of the narratives from the artist, and the artists really changed the world through their narratives. So I think it's always interesting to say, how do you start a studio? And my inspiration came when I lived in New York from Robert Blackburn. I was fortunate enough to go and see him on 17th Street. He created that studio in 1948. And I knew I couldn't do that kind of real estate in New York at that time. So I moved to Baltimore, Maryland to start Pyramid Prints and Paperworks. That was the original title of the nonprofit. And we were near Maryland Institute College of Art. We were near the train station, so artists could come in and do a workshop or do a master print. And we started with paper, so that's why Catherine asked me for a photo of myself with paper. And the substrate of the material that you print on was something I learned in India. I didn't learn it at Rhode Island School of Design where I graduated. So sometimes your travels take you far away and you come back. And I landed in Baltimore, Maryland. And that's where Pyramid then changed to Pyramid Atlantic because we were serving the Mid-Atlantic. And NEA said, that's great, you're like a trucking institution. So reflecting back the future came from Kate Davis, the now executive director. And she said that it was really looking at the archives from the 90s through 2007 of the publications we had done. And we have a wonderful archive that you can visit. But I want to add that I was really attracted to the number of workshops that already existed in Washington, D.C. So Lou Stovall's workshop, that was I made these dates because I want you to know. He started his in 1968. Ann Zahn started hers in 1971, the printmaking workshop. W.D. workshop with Percy Martin, 1970. And the handprint workshop with Dennis O'Neill, 1983. So we were joining this community of wonderful artists in 1981 with Pyramid Atlantic.
Thank you. let's move to, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but one of your current projects is the Eternal Paper Show that's on right now.
So I'm an artist curator. I don't speak German, French, and I don't have a PhD, but I think the joy of being an artist curator from the 40-year Pyramid Show to this show is very significant in that I, again, was working with artists I had known for a very long time. And Eternal Paper really describes the threshold that artists need to go across to find their work and their statement. And it's 52 works by 20 artists, 20 international artists from all around the world. But you will know the artist on the right, Joyce J. Scott, who brought me really, in addition to Robert Blackburn, to think about doing a workshop in Baltimore and then coming down further to the Mid-Atlantic. I met her as one of the first artists making paper in the studio in Baltimore. Now this piece is from 2000. It was created through an NEA grant. We were very fortunate, Pyramid Atlantic was, to get grants from NEA, Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, Maryland State Arts Council. This particular one was when her mother, Elizabeth Talbert Scott, was beginning to go into dementia, and we were in Riverdale, Maryland, which was a very high 30-foot ceiling. And when her mother came in, she was very frightened. So we gave her burpee seed catalogs and asked her to cut out all the flowers. And we made that into a lithograph. So the first thing you see here is the substrate of the paper, pulp painting, then the lithograph that Elizabeth Talbert Scott cut out the flowers for us. And then Joyce said, I can't paint. I'm not a painter. I make sculpture. I said, well, just try something. And she did this wonderful face with spewing out fire, and her little tiny hands are holding another sheet of paper. And this was made in 2000. It's 40 inches by 24 inches.
Pulp paper paintings is one of your very special contributions, and we're going to look at other examples soon. The Library of Congress is fortunate to have some extraordinary examples of your work. Here are two of them, going all the way back to 1996 with Caution, which was in the adjacent room and is a monumental print. Both of these have some good size to them. Please talk also about the paper, the special paper that you used for Caution. It's both of these are very autobiographical prints, which is part of the value for us in having them.
Thank you. Well, I think also it's important that these are done with two different master printers, and that's why I'm honored to show them, because I've been fortunate to work with Eileen Fody at Rutgers to do the Caution print. And as Mel knows, I'm very involved in nuclear proliferation. So the paper is a Japanese paper where it's a water drop paper. So there's holes in that paper, which makes sense for me for the topic of Caution.
The paper is the big part of the message. It's
very big part of the message.
Content, yeah.
And then the electronic images and the Caution all go together. And Charles Krauss was saying this is still very timely, and I couldn't agree with you more, even though it was made in '96. The piece on the left was made at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville with Beauvais Lions, and the students and Koichi Yamamoto, who's the master printer there. And I took the subject of debris because between consumer products and our own body, we leave 2,000 pounds of debris a year. So I threw out to the students, bring an image of your debris. If you look on the bottom left, there's of course, the refrigerator, but next to it is a homestead, and that was a young woman from Virginia whose parents had lost their home and it became a mall. So these students really brought out new ideas about debris for me, the cell phone that's on the bedspread on the right. And we together sheen-collated all these different images with lithograph and silkscreen and solar plate. And myself, I'm bending down, pushing away things I don't really want to think about in terms of war. And so it's called Debris.
And the recurring motif of the mushroom cloud, the sort of reference to atomic war.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. We promised to come back to pulp painting. These are among the most recent acquisitions of your work by the library. And they join, again, just a perfect kind of addition to the collection with so much meaning. They are part of our growing COVID-19 pandemic-related collections. They're fairly rare examples so far in our collection of pulp paintings. These are also monumental, enormous prints. And there's a wonderful literary, poetic dimension. Please talk a little bit about these.
So I think you collected them through the print department and also through the Asian interest at the library?
That's right. We consulted with our subject experts in the Asian division who were pleased that there was a reference to Hanuman, for example, and the Ramayana, you know.
They checked me out, in other words. So I had a show at Terzo Piano Gallery, and it was called Sanjeevani, which is an herb that means to infuse life. And Hanuman is the mercurial god that in the Ramayana, he's asked to go to the Himalayas and find 4 herbs that can cure, especially one for death, because on the battlefield, Lakshman was dying. So you see on the left this pulp painting with drawing of Hanuman going to the mountain. He has beautiful leaves in his body, and he has a pounding heart. But when he gets to the mountain, he can't identify the herbs, so he brings the whole mountain back.
He flies back. And this is from the Sanskrit epic. So it's just an incredible concept. And it has great coherence and meaning and depth for us today.
It does. And the one on the right is Hanuman, and now he is surrounded by COVID needles, and his heart is not pounding, and he's paralyzed, and he's carrying the mountain in a very different way. And I was really thrilled that the Library of Congress wanted this diptych. I can't tell you.
Come see them. Please come see them in person. They are beautiful in reproduction, but you really do have to see them in person to fully understand them. And now we come to Navigation Press. So I mentioned earlier that the library is trying to acquire regional workshops, print shops, collectives from around the country, from Oregon, from Texas, from New York, from California, and from Virginia. So that's right, from Asheville. So please talk about these examples from our Navigation Press collection.
So Navigation Press was started by Harold Linton and myself at George Mason University to bring in resident artists, and some of them knew printmaking for sure, and others didn't. But on the left is Lothar Ostenberg. He's a master of photogravure. He put up his hand at Crown Point when Catan Brown, the director, said, "Does anyone know photogravure?" And no one did. Who wants to learn? And Lothar put his hand up. And since that time, he's become one of the masters of photogravure. But he's an illusionist. So what you see here is styrofoam creating this city, which is floating under the Brooklyn Bridge. But it's all projected in as a photograph. It's not any of it real.
It's called Literary City.
Literary City. And there's 2 plates there for that. Black or sienna and blue. On the right is William Wiley. We call him Wiley. We call him the leftist printmaker because he's from California, which is the left coast. And Wiley had a wonderful one-person show at Smithsonian, curated by Joanne Moser. And I said timidly, "Do you think we could do a print with William Wiley?" And he said, yes, of course, he would love to do it. So this is a rebus and words about war and the escalation of war. And the students all wore a color band. Someone had yellow, someone had blue, someone had red. And Wiley showed them how to hand paint it, and they did all the painting for him. And that was really a joy for a student to work on a Wiley print.
I remember you worked with Enrique Chagoy, some incredible artists over the years. Helen Zugabe, who's here tonight too. And here's your beautiful leafy open air studio where folks are invited to come and make their own.
So I got very tired of driving to Fairfax, Virginia. And my students were having accidents and I was having accidents. So I created a studio in my home at Silver Spring. There's a dry and a wet studio. And artists come with interns and do pulp painting. And this is Preston Sampson, who is doing beautiful figurative work. He grew up in Florida, and he loves to tell stories about family and relationships from Florida. And he actually uses as a brush to paint. So it's just painting, but in pulp, all in creating the sheet and painting on top of the image with brushes and then putting it through a press. And it's called Reading Road Studio, and I grew up 18 miles from Reading, Pennsylvania, so you never go far from home, do you?
And a very recent project, just quickly. just quickly.
So Chris Mona, a master printer who studied at Tamarind, teaches at Anne Arundel Community College, has a press called Aquia Regis. And he asked me to jury a show, and I said, only if we can do a print together. And so we created over a year this large open book print. His idea is about the elasticity of space, and mine is about data and fluxus and witnessing, as you've seen in the other works. And this was just shown at Rhode Island School of Design. And it closes down to be a small book, but we wanted it to be 2 open books. They're slightly different. You see the man looking in the hat for truth, and there's symbols of Catherine and just a lot of Fluxus kind of involved imagery, and we're really proud to have finished it. And so that's my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're so lucky. You and Phil are both sort of full mind, full body kinds of artists, scholars, curators. You do it with every molecule of your body, what you do in terms of sharing art. So Phil, you two are kindred spirits, and it's really thrilling to have you on the stage together. This was Juanita's brainchild, by the way. This was her idea to have these great artists together in conversations. So Prints and Their Makers, a really wonderful book which won the IFPDA Book Award for Excellence in Research Scholarship and the discussion of new ideas in the field of fine prints. And you had some really specific goals in creating this book. What would you like to say?
So from the perspective of what books exist on contemporary print right now, many of them left out a lot of big chunks of the reality of the world we all live in. And so for me, it was a time to focus specifically on what additional stories need to be told, to be added to the canon that exists, which people need to be mentioned, and which connections really need to be maintained. And so for me, it was really important with this book that it tell a story, that it put you press side, that it help you understand how an artist needs to think in order to work in the process of printmaking. But it also includes the multitude of voices that have always been working but may not have gotten recognition for the work that they do. And it really was in a hope that if you didn't know anything about printmaking, it would be accessible. And if you knew some about printmaking, you'd gain a little bit more. And if you knew a lot, it'd be really geeky details in there for you. So it was really, an attempt to invite people into this world of fine art printmaking that we're all very familiar with and have been fulfilled by and are continued to be inspired by. And it's one of the reasons we do it and participate in this world. It was really help open the door, not just to prints, but also to looking at art and experiencing art for a lot of people. So that was kind of the main focus of this particular publication when it came out.
Well, this comes back to the idea of, like, from the molecules out, the books that you and Helen have written are written from really understanding how it feels from the soul and the body, and having great gift and clarity for expressing that in a way that we all can understand and appreciate. I met you, I believe, first as the master printer for Blackburn Printmaking Workshop, Bob's successor. And along with scholars like Deb Cullen and Curly Raven Holton and others, you're carrying a lot of, everyone actually here tonight carries wonderful stories about Bob and deep knowledge. So you've all been my teachers. Will you please talk about Bob's legacy and contributions a bit?
Sure. Robert Blackburn, I can't describe him as anything less than one of the most important figures in contemporary art of the last 100 years. I mean, flat out, I don't have any problem saying that. Not only was he an amazing artist, he was an exceptionally talented and creative, skilled technician when it came to printmaking. And he was a major community leader. His inspiration kept artists going. His personal finances kept artists going, and his generous spirit kept artists and communities going. There's not a printmaker, I would say over 35, that isn't in some way directly connected to Bob Blackburn and his legacy and the work that he did. As a young man, he was heavily involved in the Harlem Renaissance artists movement as it went into the WPA period. He took his first lithography course at Augusta Savage's Harlem Community Arts Center. And one of the things I like to point out about that is that Augusta Savage's brainchild of that community art center was very different than a lot of the other WPA art centers. Hers was intentionally multi-generational, intentionally multi-skill set, and intentionally multiracial, which was very rare, and it was even more rare in New York City than most people would think and understand. And so Bob Blackburn was 14 years old taking a lithography course from Reva Helfand. And who else was in that class was Ronald Joseph and Ernest Critchlow. All three of them had never done a lithograph before. And so you have these three generations of amazing artists, 10 years apart. Ernest Critchlow was in New York City because he'd been commissioned to do a mural, and that's why he was there. And he said, well, I guess I'll learn about lithography while I'm here. So you have these three people of vastly different ages all working alongside one another to learn the same medium. And it was that multi-generational aspect, multi-talented aspect that really provided the unique foundation for the Harlem Community Arts Center. And it was Bob's experience of the art world through that process that really led to him creating the model of the printmaking workshop, which many artists know today, which is a multi-generational, multicultural, multi-skill set, is being the driver, the thing that is the real glue, that where real creativity comes from when we don't necessarily know the person next to us and we talk to them and we share ideas, and maybe 2 years later you find out that was this famous artist you didn't know. And so for Bob, as an artist, he really came up through figuration. He was a skilled draftsman. I believe he got his first art review in the New York Times when he was 18. And he was unique in this regard. And he first studied at the Art Students League. Within 6 months, he went from being a student of Will Barnett's to being his collaborator. And this is in the late 40s. But Bob, as an African-American man in New York City, when he could no longer receive the scholarships to be a student, because he really was not a student, he was teaching essentially at the Art Students League, he could no longer print there. And so with Will Barnett's help and the help of a few other artists, he opened the Printmaking Workshop in 1948. And largely he couldn't print anywhere else in the city because as an African-American man in the city, those options were not open to him. And so his workshop became a haven for African-American artists, heavily Afro-Caribbean artists, and expatriated Jewish artists from Europe. Was the haven. This was the place where all of these people who weren't able to work anywhere else could work together. And it's really that inspiration that, when you look at Bob's personal work, there's an evolution in his work from figuration into abstraction, which is where he stayed and lived as an artist himself. And what I really like to highlight with this is when you see these three images here, these are three versions of heavy forms, and you can see that there's a time frame, and there's actually, I know of, I think 6 more versions of heavy forms that go into the 80s. And so this is a lithograph, and if those of you are familiar with the lithograph, Bob did it in the traditional way off of a stone. So imagine a big, heavy piece of limestone that you draw on with a greasy crayon or a paint, and then that is removed and replaced with a color. So for Bob, one of the things that he has, contributed to fine art printmaking is this idea of creating a world versus recreating a world. And I think from a technical perspective, we all know our money or the newspaper or a magazine. Those are all printed forms, and they're all recreating an idea that exists versus saying, I have a technical process that I can make a world through. And so Bob was really a pioneer at making a world through the medium of print that just happened to be additionable. And so, to get into the weeds of what a multiple original is, it means it's an original idea that only exists in this medium. It just happens that the process allows it to have more than one. And so Bob would use this. He would keep the stones just off in the corner, and 5 years later, he'd pull them back out again. He'd change things. He'd print them in different colors because for him, the composition wasn't done until it was done. And there was this wonderful evolution throughout the work. And so when you look at Bob's work, whether it be in lithography or be in woodcut, you can watch an artist's creative process because we can look at each print. We can find things that are similar or even the same. We can find colors that are the same, and we can also find a drawing that's now in a different color or a different orientation. So we as viewers are extraordinarily privileged to get to witness in front of us his creative process. And it's one of the things about printmaking that most artists love and fall in love with. They get addicted to themselves is getting to be a viewer of their own work. Because when we talk about printmaking, you work on plates or stones or wood blocks, And all these different parts and pieces have to come together for that last lift of the paper off the press. And no one knows what it's going to look like until it's revealed.
The aha moment.
The aha moment. And so for an artist to get to be a viewer of your own work, just like everyone else, teaches you more about your own creative process than any other way of working. And now you're also doing it with people, right? So you're experimenting with support, with a team. And that's why the collaborative aspect of printmaking is so special. It's not just you by yourself and the subjectivity of your memory to determine if making this change was good or bad. You have the print in front of you, and you have people around you. And I think it's that environment that Bob helped create, and actually began making less of his own work to put his time, his effort, his energy, his money into making that environment possible for others. So it's important to note that in 1958, he made the decision to pull back on his own work, to put more of his effort into making sure that these opportunities were available for other artists. So it goes without saying his generosity. So I was tasked in 2006 to reopen Bob's workshop. It closed in August of 2001. So it was and it was due to finances. So Bob was many amazing things. Businessman was not on his list of things, and he always needed help with that. So, Bob got a check. That money was generally given out to artists, whether direct cash to help him with something, or paper, or to buy plates. He could not hold on to money in any way. And so he assumed at that time that he'd be able to reopen the workshop, raise the money, pay the back rent, get it open. But September 11th happened 3 weeks later. And so there was no fundraising happening for the arts in New York City after that. And so for Bob, this was a pretty devastating blow, because this is his home, this is his entire life, put into this workshop, as well as all the artists who relied on his studio space. And so over a period of time, Will Barnett, who had helped him open the printmaking workshop in '48, was sitting on the board of the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts in New York City, and helped it become a program of the Elizabeth Foundation. So Bob wrote the artistic vision. Bob was the artistic director. He wasn't in a health situation to run the studio by any means. And at that time was when Deborah Collin finished her cataloging of the prints in the collection, the Printmaking Workshop collection, and when those prints became part of the Library of Congress collection. And this is a big deal, because what that collection represented was artists of color working in abstraction through the period of the generation of abstraction in the United States, which was not represented in any way in the collection at all. And so not only was it a group of artists working, but the best caveat for me that Deb Collin put on that, and to this day I think it's something that we all need to think about, was in order to have that collection, they had to have at least one impression from every artist represented in that collection go with it. You couldn't just pick the famous people.
So 1,300 artists, about 2,500 prints, and the most comprehensive collection anywhere of Bob Blackburn's work.
And it's not to be understated, because there isn't a print by an artist you might know, someone like, say, Romare Bearden or Elizabeth Catlett, that wasn't working alongside an artist you didn't. And it's those conversations that occur that created all of the work, right? So why it was so important that it retained that entire community aspect is because it was a community. And for me, that's what's so special, and why it's so great that it's in this particular collection versus other collections.
And I'll tell you something, we exhibited that collection before we actually owned it, which is unheard of. Never before, probably never again, because we were so committed to acquiring that collection. But we were able to do it while Bob was living, just barely. Yep. And the exhibit director is here tonight, who worked on that show, and it was something really special.
That's
2003.
That's a will it and it will happen situation. See, I mean, sometimes the exhibiting of the work really helps people understand its value. And I think in that case, that was a major part of helping to seal the deal, because it was the sale of that actually generated the funds to reopen the workshop. And so without that, the workshop would not have reopened. So it's extraordinarily important what institutions can do. It's not just to preserve, but it's actually to make things possible. When I talk to collectors all the time, I say, when you buy work from a living artist, you're doing two things. you're supporting the positive growth of our culture, as well as allowing that artist to continue to contribute to our culture by supporting them. And this was one of those ways in which all of the artists since have now been able to be supported in their growth and artistic development because of that person.
And there's a steady drumbeat of artists, researchers, teachers, students coming to work with the collection. We have been fully vindicated. And one more thing is that the entire collection at the item level is being cataloged by a team right now. One of our catalogers is here tonight, and so it's all going to be online very shortly. You have to talk about Chikaya book about this insane sheen collate, this beautiful.
So one of my jobs with the workshop was not only to get it going again, but try to make it fiscally capable and responsible, which in and of itself is another challenge. And so one of the aspects of the studio was creating a publishing program and working with artists that may or may not have ever had the opportunity to make prints, or we knew would have a really great impact just even on the environment of the studio. And I have to say, Chikaya Booker has probably made the largest impact on the studio since its reopening, not just in her work, but her presence. She's an extraordinarily generous soul and human being, and has spent a great deal of time helping other artists with their own work. So she and I met in 2009, and we decided to start working on some prints. I had seen her work, I think, for the first time in 2001 at an art fair, and if you've ever seen her tire sculptures, you won't ever forget them, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's some of the most moving work in its physical presence, but also conceptually with everything else that comes with it too. And so Chikaya and I have been making prints since 2009 together, and her process is one that is unique to printmaking. And I think any printer here, and Helen, I know this has happened to you dozens of times, an artist comes to you with a problem, and we're trying to figure out how to solve it creatively. And new processes are invented in that process of figuring out this artistic problem to solve. And so for Chikaya Booker, we worked in the studio for about 6 months in every print process you can imagine, and she hated everything. It was just, she's like, I don't like any of this, none of it's looking good. And I'm scratching my head, and I'm just like, finally, I'm like, what about this process don't you like? She goes, I don't like that in printmaking, I make a mark here and it has to stay there. And so we developed this process of sheen collé for her, specifically because if there's a mark she likes, she can have it 15, 20, 30, 40 times to put in an image. And the first question she asked when we started cutting pieces of paper out to then re-put them back together through the press was, how many layers of paper thick can we do? And with traditional sheen collé, it's 1. And I was like, maybe 3? I was like, I don't know. And then she started giving me 4, 5, 6. And I stopped counting when we hit 8 pieces of very thin paper thick. And so we developed this way of working for her. So we pre-coat the paper with a water reconstitutable glue. It's basically like a lick and stick postage stamp. Then we print her wood blocks on top, and we hand her all that stuff back. And she cuts things out and uses push pins, as you can see in the image on the right, to put it all together. And our job is to delicately take the pins out using wet paper from the front and wet paper from the back.
Fraught with danger.
Flip it over. And some of the prints have well in excess of 300 little pieces of paper. Some huge pieces, tiny pieces. And so our job is to flip them over and get them through the press, and she actually uses the press as a drawing tool at this point. And so it's this wonderfully free and creative process that we came up with for her, which is really the standard in collaborative printmaking. And I know, Helen, you've done this time and time again. Your artist comes to you and you find a way to make it possible. Mm-hmm. One thing I want to point out, that when Chikaya and I first met one another, I told her I had a goal for her work. And she said, I have a goal for the work too. I was like, what's your goal? She's like, you're in my house, you go first. I was like, all right. And I said, I want to make something flat. And she's like, that's what I want to do. So we knew it was going to work. And so I've been making prints, and I mean, she's been coming to my studio in Asheville, and we've been working on things together in different parts of the United States. And it's a tradition that's continued. And so my tenure at the workshop, my period of stewardship was from 2006 to 2015. And she still works in the studio. It's her home away from home. She would tell you that's her primary New York City studio, because her sculpture studio's in Pennsylvania. And for her, printmaking has become a right hand, and it's something that pairs perfectly with her sculpture. So. and some of the things that I do too, because we all wear lots of hats to eat in these worlds, but we also get sucked into things that just need to be. And so I've known the artist Todd Anderson for a long time, and Todd's here, and his book is on display, and he brought a block from this particular print for a long time, and we had a lot of conversations about how his work was evolving, and he got involved with two other artists, Ian Van Collar and Bruce Cronover, to document something that they're very passionate about, which is how an artist can see and interpret the world, and in their lens specifically are working towards climate change and glacial recession. And so the image you're looking at is it's a reduction woodcut, and if you know that, it's lovingly referred to as suicide printing, because if you make mistakes, you can't go backwards. So you carve a block, you print a layer, you carve away, you print again, and if you made a mistake, it's just kind of done. And you get the number of prints that survive the printing process. So it is not a process for the faint of heart, but at the same time, there's a lot of wonderful conceptual synergies with it. It's this one shot we get. It's the risk you take moving forward to try to get it right. And so these artists were documenting the way they felt and the way the places felt. In this particular case, Glacier National Park, of which, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but I believe by 2035 there won't be any glaciers left in Glacier National Park. And so these artists have worked together on a variety of projects, chronicling different parts of the world and climate change and glacial recession, and they've done a lot of really important work. So for me, part of my job in this was to help it find homes. These sorts of very culturally important and timely and relevant works of art that should be in conversation. So a big part of my other job other than printing is to try to help things find the right homes, and this is one of those, and this came here to the Library of Congress.
So museum caliber artwork that relates to so many different layers of sort of content and meaning to reflect culture, society, history, national parks, environmental health, the very unusual technique that you used here, home run.
And so,
Here's some very immaculate, exquisite, and rigorous prints by Phil Sanders and Sarah Sanders.
So I won't talk much about my work. It's not my place at this time, but I will talk about Sarah's print on the right, which is it's actually way bigger on screen than it is in reality. It's a very small print. It's 10 inches by 8 inches. It's a 12-color lithograph of a small chair. And
it's like a portrait of a chair.
It's like a portrait of a chair. And one of the things I like to point out about her work in particular is she likes to draw things the way we think we see them and the way we feel about them, not necessarily the way they actually are. And so if from a technical drawing perspective, this is out of perspective, it's missing what you would normally see, especially if you see some of the other chairs in the series. It's missing its back legs, which makes it a little bit more human, right? You would normally see parts of the back. And so what she does is she'll decide what she's wanting to work on, she'll draw it accurately, and then she starts to warp it to the way we see it, or we in our minds, because it's really important for her that we fill in those gaps. And so she generally doesn't put anything else in the environment, because that's her goal, is to engage you in a way that you fill in that environment. And I think I like to use her work as an example to talk about what most artists are trying to do, which they're trying to help us see the world the way they see the world. They're trying to invite us into a conversation. And for her, this is a chair we actually own. It's in our house. And it's an old chair. It's been in her, it's for a long time, and this is the one we read stories to our girls in. But it has a lot of love and character. And so the chairs that she does these portraits of, some of them are imagined and some of them are real. And so but her idea was always that she wanted them to feel cozy. She wanted to take the stress off.
Existed in the world. You have to talk about your artwork, please.
I'll talk a little bit. So that's a screen print. It was published by Fourth Estate. It's on the left of mine, and it's part of a series of 3 prints. It's like a Stars and Stripes series. So it's more of a comment on how we've treated ourselves and how we feel about things versus the ways in which we actually say we do them. So the first print in the series is a folded black flag, American flag. It has a lot of art historical references, but it's really how you really feel when you get one of those. And if you're a family that's ever received a folded flag, you know what I mean with that. That is a black flag. That's right. What that is. And this one is based off of an old IQ test from the 40s, which was used to essentially discriminate out. So if you couldn't find the star in the diagram, your IQ was rated lower. And then the third one is a series of stripes. It's like, from Adidas tennis shoes. And so there's a lot of cultural references that run through. I mean,
Did I dream that there's a musical reference?
And every one of them. And this one refers to Black Star, the hip-hop duo Mos Def and Talib Kweli. So that's the first one, Black Flag, the punk rock band, and so for me, music has been a pervasive part of my life, and I think culturally it's something that's always there and heavily connected to the visual arts. So each one of these images is layered in different ways for me. So.
We're going to turn to Q&A in a moment, but one final, very recent project.
So in my studio in Asheville, I do a variety of things. So I have a contract printer, so people pay me to make prints, either as a print publisher or their gallery or artists. And I also publish work, and I'm working on launching some new initiatives to do two different things. One is to influence what goes into museum collections, so to help augment collections with work that they're missing and that they should have, but they don't, but also make it collectible. And some of it is continuing to work with artists I've worked with for a really long time, because you develop relationships. So the first artist I worked with in my studio in Asheville was Chikaya. And the two artists that I've had the longest working relationships with are James Sienna and Chikai Booker. So James Sienna, 20 years, he and I have been making lithographs together this summer. So
a new project, but a long,
new project, but an old one. And why I wanted to talk about this, and if you look up close, if you're familiar with James's work, he's known for really tight drawings and patterns and optical art. And this was a foray into trying something different, which is being a little looser, right? And so printmaking is really this place where a lot of artists feel the most free to experiment. And I think, Helen, the work that you've done and what you've published through the salon is really to push artists to feel comfortable in experimenting. And so James was really wanting to see if he could be loose as an artist, and it was very successful in that regard. So these are prints that are under production at the moment. So we've signed off on them, but they're not quite done. And I think, for those of us who have made prints or worked on prints, it's that exploration aspect that keeps us coming back. And it's the community aspect that surrounds it that keeps them living. So
that's a really good place to sort of, first of all, I can kind of smell the ink coming off of that. And just thank you, Juanita, Mel, Helen, and Phil, for sharing your deep knowledge and passion about collaborative art.